A lot of people told this former Marine she would never make it in the Corps, including her superiors at Officer Candidate School. But she defied the odds and made it happen.
It doesn't really matter what everybody else thinks. It really only matters what you think, that you believe in yourself.
How a woman on course to be a school teacher ended up a Marine major, and how that pivot shaped her entire future. Up next on Reinvention at Any Age. How did you end up in this kind of situation?
And that changed the whole trajectory of your life.
This is my light, and I'm going to let it shine. Even if it's uncomfortable, if the change is for the better, it's worth it. Don't be scared. Prepare.
Reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Reinvention at Any Age. I'm Jodie Sweezey, and I am passionate about helping you navigate through your reinvention. My guest today has reinvented herself multiple times throughout her life. She has an undergraduate degree in education, a master's degree in history, and a PhD in anthropology. She spent 12 years in the United States Marine Corps, including 2 combat tours in Iraq, and has also worked as a historian, researcher, retail business owner, analyst, program manager, college professor, team leader, independent consultant, and business partner. Please welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jodie Sweezey. Hello, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, we need to let my listeners know that we have the same last name. So if you didn't guess, Jodie is my big sister. And I am extremely proud of all of her accomplishments that you heard me read at the beginning, and so grateful that you are willing to be a guest on my podcast.
Thank you for talking with me.
So when people hear your bio that I read at the beginning of the podcast, I think they think, wow, she's had a lot of jobs. But you are in your 50s, just like me, and many of your jobs have been interconnected. So I guess what I want to start with is when you look back on all these various things that you've done, your different education, your different jobs, would you label each of those things as reinventions?
I think I would. Sometimes those, reinventions are a little more dramatic. There's been some major occurrence in my life to bring about change. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle and, it's just an outgrowth of a previous experience. But like you said, most of my experiences are very interconnected, and, the path that I've been on, though sometimes crooked, sometimes, sharp right and left turns, it has always been a movement forward. And so, yes, I would definitely consider them all reinventions.
I think when people think about reinventing themselves, they want to do it, but they don't really know maybe why or how. So those are some of the things I want to talk to you about today. Your very first job out of college was actually going in the Marine Corps. What was it that drew you to Officer Candidate School instead of just getting a job as a teacher? I mean, that's what your undergrad degree was in.
Growing up, I was always fascinated with, just Dad's experience in Vietnam. We spent mostly our late high school years, grilling him and asking him questions about that experience. And then when I was 16, becoming a huge Civil War buff and starting to really become very interested in military history. I think that was what propelled me mostly toward, the Marine Corps. But it was something that had been extremely interested in, and started talking about joining. I guess it was shortly after I became interested in military history. And, obviously Dad wasn't particularly excited about that, former Marine, Vietnam, 67 to 68, which was the, bloodiest year for the Marine Corps in Vietnam. And he wasn't really excited about that. And I remember after Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and watching that play out on TV, on CNN, like the rest of America, I went to him and said, look, I know you don't want me to, but I'm joining the Marine Corps. And so, he sat me down and had me watch Full Metal Jacket, and, he kept pointing to the TV and saying, see, it's just like that. Boot camp is just like that. And I wasn't fazed by that. And so, he said, okay, look, if you're going to go in, at least go in as an officer. And so I went and talked to a officer selection officer, and the rest is history.
So your first reinvention was really going from what could have been a teacher to
Yeah.
a female Marine.
Yeah. Which is a pretty big reinvention. That was one of those significant changes.
And totally changed the trajectory of your life.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
So you were in for a little while, and then you got out several years. You got out of the Marine Corps at one point. You were done. You had married a fellow Marine. You both got out around the same time. And then fast forward a few years later, you get a divorce and you decide to go back into the Marines. So what was the thinking there?
During that time away, I didn't go into the reserves after I got out. I had some health challenges, and I went back to school, got a master's in history, and thought that was kind of where I was headed. I thought I would be a married mom of four, in my future, and then suddenly found myself divorced and unable to have kids. And I'd had an operation that corrected the issues that I had, and which had kept me out of the reserve. So when Iraq and Afghanistan kicked off, it just was this nagging feeling like, I needed to do my part, and happened to meet with a prior service recruiter. I didn't even know it was a thing. And actually a lot of Marines who were totally out went back in to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I wasn't unique by any stretch of the imagination. But that was, at the time I was already, working in DOD as a contractor. So I wasn't completely outside, the military world. But when I realized that I could, then go back in the reserves and deploy, I took the opportunity, which actually then led to another huge reinvention or 5.
Okay. So, and we'll talk about that in a second. I want to just pause for a second, because I do think one of the significant reinventions that a lot of people go through is when they do get divorced. I mean, they go from single to married and then back to single again, or divorcee. So what was that chapter like for you?
It was a hard time. Like I said, what I thought was what my life was headed toward suddenly no longer was the case. Luckily, I have a wonderful family, and not just because you're interviewing me.
You have to say that.
Yeah, I have to say that. But the strength of my family helped me a lot. No, I was a little bit rudderless for a lot of years. I struggled for a lot of years, but really, I had some really great friends while I was living in Louisville that helped me. The point that made the biggest difference, though, was getting back in the reserves and deploying, because I found my strength again. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence, and proved to myself that I could do a lot more than I was giving myself credit for.
So it's like you needed to find a purpose.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what Iraq gave me. And it was really, being in Iraq that then led me to where I'm at today.
And it sounds like also, you're talking a lot about your family and your friends, and that chapter
Yeah.
of your life that a lot of people will say, having that support around them, finding their tribe, finding like-minded people who build them up, but also hold them accountable. Was
Yeah.
that important in that time of your
Hugely
life?
important. Yeah. I mean, truly, my friends Laura and Christy in Louisville were just a huge part of helping me through those years. They didn't let me wallow in self-pity, whether family or friends, but encouraged me that I could get through this, and that this was just a season. It wasn't the end all be all. But I think figuring out and being willing to be open to a lot of different possibilities, even chapters in the past that I thought doors were closed, i.e. the Marine Corps, being open to the possibility that was something that I could do again in the future. Just being open to those possibilities was also really important.
And wasn't this the time too that you went back and got your master's, went back to school?
No, I got my master's before I was divorced, because that was in Kentucky.
Okay. Yeah. And also you were a college professor too, after you got your master's.
I was, yeah, I was able to teach, and I loved teaching history. It was a community college, which I'm a huge proponent of community colleges. I think the students are fantastic, and some of the best classes I've ever taken were at the community college. So the opportunity to teach there for a couple of years was at that level was fantastic, and I loved my students. In fact, I still am in touch with some of them.
That's
25
great.
years later, um, they'll reach out to me from time to time and check in and see how I'm doing, and that's been a lot of fun. Just to know that you made history come alive for somebody that, may or may not have been that excited about it. That's a good feeling. So I love teaching.
So even though you didn't teach right away after you graduated with your
Yeah,
undergrad, you went in the Marine Corps, you did come
I
back
did.
to one of those passions that you
Mhm.
had.
Yeah. And I'm still teaching today, and just in a different capacity.
I think that's key too for so many people because there's people who are maybe they're in a rut, they're not happy, they want to make a change, they want to reinvent their life, maybe they want to reinvent their career, but they're not sure where to start. And the pattern that I'm getting from you is that you go back to some of your roots. You go back and you grab some of those things that you love, some of those things you've already done, and you just reapply them maybe in a new way.
Absolutely. It's definitely a path that you're on, and it's just being willing to take sometimes just a slight turn, and doing this thing that you're passionate about in just slightly a different way. It's led me then to other amazing opportunities and things that I never really thought about.
Well, one of my favorite jobs that you've had besides being a Marine is your online retail business. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
A huge learning curve, and not a successful venture, but I so while I was in Iraq, I was a civil affairs officer, which I'm out working. You're kind of very simple terms. You're a liaison essentially between the uniform military personnel and the civilian population, and the role that you have in a combat zone it's huge and incredibly varied. I'm in Iraq. I'm there to I have both tours working among the Iraqi population. I also at that during that time have a lot of exposure to nonprofits and NGOs that are working in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I got home, that exposure, I started to look more into NGOs and met other women who were working specifically in Afghanistan, which was where I became most passionate about it. They were starting small businesses for women. They were making things in these small businesses. They needed to sell it to earn the money to keep going, to teach these women business skills, but they didn't have a marketplace to sell things, and because that takes a lot of time. So I stepped in and I pulled together a lot of different NGOs that were working with women's small business development, and provided a marketplace for them to sell those goods. Unfortunately, it was only a part-time job, and I made a lot of mistakes. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never had my own business before, and unfortunately had to close it down a few years later. But
What were the mistakes? Do you think that you went into it without enough of a plan? Like,
yeah,
or was
yeah.
it just timing or
I think it was a little of everything. I think it was, I didn't leverage enough of there's so many resources out there for people that want to start their own business. I love being my own boss, which I have done for the past 5 years. I love it can be scary at times, but what I have learned in the second go around is that there is an incredible amount of, like the Small Business Association, veterans actually have a lot of awesome resources that they can leverage. And so had I had that knowledge and leveraged those resources, I think it would have been a lot better.
so how difficult was it to make that decision that you needed to close it down? Because I know that that was really a dream, especially because you were so passionate about helping women in these other countries.
It was really hard. That was hard. I lost a lot of money, which was also painful, but it was sad. It was a chapter that once it was over, I do see how it led to other things going forward, and how it led me to my next step, which was, I think incredibly important. Um, and I've used that knowledge that I gained by working with the NGOs so many different in so many different ways. So even though it was a failure, what I learned from it, the experiences I got from it, I've used in so many different ways in the last few years.
Well, and that was kind of leading into my next question, was how those Marine Corps experiences in Iraq, or not even just in Iraq, but just being a part of this very structured organization, being a woman in a male dominated career, all of those things, how did that shape then your post-military career once you got out of the Marine Corps?
The Marine Corps for me was incredibly helpful because one, the discipline I desperately needed. It wasn't obvious when I was 18 that I was going to even go in the military, let alone the Marine Corps, and thrive in that environment. But I did, and I'm very grateful to everything that the Marine Corps taught me. And I wouldn't trade a single day of those 12 years at all. So the discipline, the structure was good for me. It also taught me that I can do a lot more than I give myself credit for. Sometimes I don't have a lot of, I don't believe in myself enough. And so I think the Marine Corps definitely helped me with that. Yeah, it was a very tough environment. I'm not easily phased now, in different scenarios, being either with people that are much senior to me, or in an all male environment. It doesn't really phase me anymore. But yeah, so the Marine Corps taught me a lot. And, even on the other side of being a combat veteran, I think when things get really rough, I just think to myself, well, nobody's shooting at me, I'm not getting blown up. So it's a good day. And this is nothing.
One of the things that you just said really stuck out to me, and that is that you had a hard time believing in yourself. And I think that's true with so many people. And I think that's what puts the fear into people when they're looking to reinvent themselves. They don't have that belief that they can do it because maybe somebody else has told them all along that you can't, or maybe they have an inner voice that keeps saying you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, or you just don't have the skills. You're trained in this field and this job takes this kind of training and you don't have that. So how do you feel like you overcame that?
I think just getting rid of all the noise. It doesn't really matter what everybody else thinks. It really only matters what you think and that you believe in yourself. You can prove people wrong. It really is just you believing in yourself. I actually have a picture that was taken of me in Iraq in 2006 by a embedded journalist, and I didn't even know that it was taken. But I was supporting a buddy's unit, and this reporter took the picture, and it's, I'm in all my gear and rifle and translator near me, and I'm pointing at something, and I keep that picture on my phone because sometimes I've just got to remind myself that I've done far worse and far more challenging things than whatever it is I'm looking at. You've got to sometimes remind yourself, but it is really very important just to believe in yourself, and it's about what you believe, not what everybody else thinks.
And I remember not too long ago, I showed that picture to a friend of mine, Jacob, who is a former Marine. I know once, always, right? And the first thing he said, he looked at that picture and he's like, wow, she's a badass. And I'm like, yup, that picture pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
So fast forward in time, you are out of the Marine Corps now for the second time. What in the world made you decide to go back to school to, number one, get your PhD, and number two, in anthropology?
So as you know, the fact that I spent this long in school is a shocker because I hated school when I was in high school. I hated school as an undergrad. I think the discipline of the Marine Corps really did help me with school. I'm working at Special Operations Command as a civilian, not very happy, didn't like my job particularly well, but it was a good paying job. It was a solid job. So I was there. I had tried the business, with the nonprofits, working with the NGOs, and um, this whole idea of other cultures was of interest. And I remember I was reading something on the portal at Special Operations Command, and it was written by an anthropologist. And I read it, and it was about Afghanistan. And I just remember pointing at my screen, and I'm like, that's how I want to understand other cultures. This is the knowledge I want, because I knew that we had missed a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan. I knew that when it came to really understanding the complexity of culture, we didn't get it the way that we needed to. And so when I read that paper, it was like this, light bulb moment for me. And somebody said, "Hey, you should talk to this anthropologist who had been in the Army previously." She was, worked a lot with DoD, and so I went and talked to her, and she encouraged me to look at the PhD program at the University of South Florida. And so I applied to the program, thought there's no way I'll get accepted. And they accepted me. I don't know why to this day, but they did. And, it was a long, hard 7 years, but I am so grateful. I think that's the second big reinvention for me, was that program, because it was long and painful.
And in those 7 years, did you ever think about giving up and just saying, never mind?
Yeah, like, I remember my very first class, I walked up to the professor and he asked me what I thought. And I'm like, I am the dumbest person in this class. I said that to my professor, and he started laughing, and he goes, he's like, you're not, but he said, it's not about the smartest guy in this classroom. He said, the people who are the absolute smartest in here will not finish this program. And it's because it's not necessarily about being the smartest. It's about having the most perseverance. And I'm like, that I've got determination. Don't tell me I can't do something. I can do that. So I knew that I could do it. It was, but yeah, there were a lot of times I missed a lot of stuff. There were times when I couldn't do things with the family that I wanted to do. There were times when I was exhausted and just wiped out, and but I knew that I had to keep going because it's what I wanted. So,
Did the anthropology degree, did that help you then move into your current company, Intended Consequences Group?
oh,
Tell me a little bit about that company, what it is and what you do and how that came about.
I was actually living in Nigeria, working for an NGO, and decided to leave the organization, and got a phone call from somebody I knew who was an Army civil affairs officer, retired, who was starting a company. And he said, hey, we're getting ready to start this company. Are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So we were working on our business plan and what it is we were going to do. And I kept saying, we really want to fix the unintended consequences. We want to get in there and make sure that organizations, namely DoD, we're avoiding these unintended consequences of their actions, because we often don't realize the things we think we're doing are good really aren't. And he said, well, what if we called it intended consequences? And I'm like, ooh, that's really good. Our goal is really just that. It's to, through training and education and consulting, provide different industry partners, be it, military, be it, State Department or government, non-governmental organizations, that the ability to avoid those mistakes through training and education. And really, it's about helping work cross-culturally in a way that is significant and important and successful. We want people to have success.
Well, your definition is much better, because when people usually ask me what you do, I say, well, she goes to other countries and she teaches their military to do what our military does.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've reinvented yourself both personally and vocationally a few times, as you've shared. So, do you think that those reinventions have made you more confident for future reinventions? Or are you just like, you know what? I've had so many reinventions, I'm done?
It does get exhausting after a while, but I think, if everything shut down tomorrow, look at, I would look at it again, because sometimes like I said, sometimes it's born out of necessity. I'm not going to go out and seek, a change, because I'm really happy where I'm at right now. But, things could completely fall apart tomorrow and I have to start over. I do think that having done it, it does give you confidence that, you can do it, that, you just have to remind yourself that, I've done it before, I can do it again. And I have to remind myself always that during those times, even the failures, I've learned so much, and I've leveraged what I've learned in, whatever it is that I end up doing, in the future. So, all of those lessons that I've learned over the years, I've really relied on, and they've been really important in helping me in, whatever it is, whether I'm teaching in Somalia, like I was a few weeks ago. I talk about a lot of these experiences that I've had, whether it's, in the NGO world as an anthropologist, and, in Iraq, doing humanitarian work in Afghanistan, whatever, those experiences are, I really rely on those.
So, what advice do you have for others who want to reinvent themselves?
Don't defeat yourself mentally. I think probably the greatest gift the Marine Corps gave me, was not giving up in that mental toughness, which I've kind of skirted around through our whole conversation. And something that when your son joined the Marine Corps recently, I said to him 1,000 times over is, it's all up here. You defeat yourself mentally. And so, believing in yourself, um, digging deep, and really, not defeating yourself mentally, believing that you can accomplish something. And even when things look the darkest, not giving up on yourself, and not giving up on your dream or what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. I know you're not big on social media, but if people want to know more about you or your business, where can they find you or follow you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I am on there. And then we have our website. It's ic-group-llc.com.
Okay. Dr. Jodie Sweezey, thank you for being here and being a guest on my podcast. I know that your story is going to inspire so many others.
Thank you.
So, what about you? Were you inspired by Jodie's story of reinvention? Sometimes life doesn't go the way we think or plan. Sometimes we set out on a course, and through various circumstances, we end up in something entirely different. And sometimes it happens more than once. If you're in a place that you don't want to be, or you have a life that you want to change, don't quit. Don't give up. Find that mental toughness. Figure out what you need to do to make it happen, and start taking those steps, even if they're baby steps. Change your habits. It is never too late, and you are never too old. Every day is a chance to start over and become brand new. So whether you want to reinvent yourself or you have to reinvent yourself, remember, reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today.